Well, good evening, folks. It's great to have you here. We're going to do something a little bit different tonight, as in I am not going to speak to you. You're going to see somebody else speaking to us. Just one thing to mention beforehand, though. This coming Sunday, I forgot to mention it last Sunday, there's two services, not one. So there's an evening communion service again, 6:30 Sunday night. And that's pretty much it. So just to let you know that, I was chatting with some people earlier this week and they said we didn't know anything about it. So now you do. So that'll be this Sunday, 6:30. Now, what we're going to do is we're going to watch a video. It was kind of released during Canopy, which is kind of the get-together of the Baptist Union of Scotland churches. And this guy speaking is the General Director of the BUS, of which we are a part. And he's kind of speaking about his goal, his aim, his dream, as it were, for Baptist Union of Scotland churches. But he gives a really good overview of where the church is at in Scotland for Baptist Union churches. This is. So I thought we'd listen to it and see what he wants us to be doing. And at the end, he just gives us 3 points, one of them being prayer, so we can pray into what he shares with us. And also the prayer for Ukraine was on earlier tonight, and James has got prayer points for that. So when we get together to pray after we've listened to Martin, then we'll pray both for churches across Scotland and for what's going on in Ukraine as well. So if we can watch this video, that'll be dandy.
Increase. We all tell stories. It's how we make sense of life. And we've all got pandemic stories. Some of them are heroic. Some of them are quite funny. Some of them are tragic. And our churches have pandemic stories. Stories of how we innovated and coped with change. Stories of how we served the community in new ways. Stories of how we remained faithful to Jesus through difficult times. But what's concerning me is what the final chapter of our pandemic story as churches might be. Because as I look around the country, I hear so many churches saying that we only have 70, 75 or 80% of the people who gathered together before the pandemic with us now. There's 10, 20, 25% of people missing. Of course, there are some terrific exceptions to that, but it looks like this is shaping up to be a time of decline. And if we look at the history of our network of churches over the last 60 years, we see there has been steady decline over that period. So in fact, over 60 years, the number of members in Scottish Baptist churches has halved. Now, what's the impact of the pandemic going to be? At the moment, it looks like this graph is going to extend and descend more sharply. This could be a season of decline. The last chapter of the pandemic story could be the acceleration of decline. But I've been thinking about this and praying about this and really felt God saying to us that he has another story to write for our churches. And the word he's giving us is increase. I really asked myself, did God call me to be a follower of Jesus in order to be part of a decreasing church? Did God call me to be pastor of local churches for 25 years in order to oversee decline? Did he lead me to my role in the national team of our union now, simply so that we could efficiently handle the inevitability of diminishing churches? I just don't believe he did. And I began to share this with our national team, and we prayed about this, and we tried to listen to God, and we had a day of prayer and fasting, and we sensed together that we had to say, on our watch, we won't settle to supervise decline. And we felt God was giving us a particular passage of scripture. It comes from the time when God tells Jeremiah to write a letter to the people who've been taken into exile. It's a tough time for them. It's a difficult time. The number of people in the nation has decreased. It looks like this exile could be the first step towards the diminishing and final disappearance of the nation of God's people. But God tells Jeremiah to write a surprising message to them. Increase in number there. Do not decrease. And I believe this is a word that God is giving us for these difficult post-pandemic times. Increase in number. Do not decrease. Now, however could that be possible? Well, one part of this, and the part that I'm particularly interested in, is that as churches together, as a network, we can help one another and support one another and become more than the sum of our parts. You might remember that when we first launched our national gathering as Canopy, we said the picture came from the idea that the different churches in our network are all trees planted in the place God has put them. But together we form a forest. And so the Baptist Union of Scotland is like a forest, trees that actually at canopy level begin to grow into each other and connect. And when we have an event like Canopy, we are connecting together. But the thing about the forest is there's a much deeper connection that lasts all the time, because beneath the forest floor there are strands of a fungi called mycelium, millions of these strands that connect the trees together at root level. And through mycelium they share water and they share nutrients, and sometimes trees pass messages to each other. And we've said that our network of churches is like a kind of forest, and our unity in the Spirit of God pursuing the gospel of Jesus through the love that he pours in our hearts and through the great commission he's given us is a bit like the mycelium as we share resources and strengthen one another. And what might that mean as we consider the increase of vision, the possibility of increase? I think there are three things that God is calling us to do together. And the first one is prayer. Increase happens because God is at work. If we think that we, by our human strength, by our skillful techniques, can turn around years and decades of decline, then we're missing the point. But what we've learned during the pandemic is that actually praying together is better and more possible than we thought. So many churches have discovered that more people have joined together in prayer during this last season, especially through Zoom prayer meetings, which has enabled people to come together in quite a different way. Nationally, we've had a whole series of prayer meetings, at one point weekly and then monthly and then special at some special times in the calendar, like through Lent. We've prayed together nationally. And it's my conviction that God is calling us as a network of churches to pray for increase. The Apostle Paul is talking about church planting at one point, and he says, well, I planted some seeds and Apollos watered them, but God gave the increase. And if there is to be increase in our churches, it will be because God gives it. And I think that going forward, there are so many ways that we can set about praying together and releasing the resources of each other's churches to build one another up. Our national prayer meetings have been great, and we'll still have those from time to time. But what about the churches in a town or an area getting together and saying, we want to pray for increase in our town or district? What about a leadership team from one church asking the leaders from another nearby church to come and meet with them and say, will you pray with us and listen to God with us to help us understand what he's calling us to do, that we might see increase in these times? It is something that God is calling us to do together more than ever. Prayer. But secondly, planting. Study after study has shown that the most consistently effective way of seeing new disciples of Jesus made is through planting new congregations. Of course, that's what's happened from the book of Acts onwards. We've seen the church expand as congregations have been planted in new places. There have been times in our Baptist history in the 19th century and the 20th century when together as a network we've set about planting many new churches. And God has been faithful, and the number of believers and the number of churches have grown during those times. And this is another such era. Tim Keller says something great about church planting. He says the vigorous continual planting of new congregations is the single most critical strategy for two things. One, the numerical growth of the body of Christ in a city. And two, the continual corporate renewal and revival of the existing churches in a city. The point of planting is not simply that, well, there are a few big churches that can spare a people and give them away, but that we could work together on this, and some large and some small churches could plant new congregations, could plant many new congregations. And some churches won't directly send out a group of people from their congregation to plant something new, but they'll be partnered in with other churches, and maybe corporately the churches in a town or in a region will seek God and say, we need to plant here. And they'll work together to do that. Or they will know that a nearby church is planting, and their commitment will be to pray for that. And their commitment might be to give resources to help support that in finance. Or there might be just one person who can be given to join a church plant. There are so many ways we can do this together. And as a Baptist network, we can become more than the sum of our parts when it comes to planting new churches. And here's the third thing, creating a pipeline. If we are to see increase, then we need leaders who are trained as evangelists and church planters. As a network, we are good at training pastor teachers for our churches, particularly through our Scottish Baptist College and also through some other trainers who've helped us as well. We have excellent pastor teachers across the country. We need those people, and we need to keep developing those people. But alongside them, we need people whose specialism is that entrepreneurial, spirit-inspired courage and insight into what it takes to plant a church. And that passion that's stirred up and nurtured and trained well to do the work of an evangelist. It so happens that in the last 2 or 3 years, 3 churches have closed, and a certain amount of money has come to the Baptist Union of Scotland through the sale of their buildings. And this money, we have agreed, our council has agreed, as our council espoused this increased vision, that money that is coming from the closure of churches must be spent on the planting of new churches. So at this point in history, we are poised to make available a substantial sum of money to support the planting of churches. And we need to invest, and we will need more money, as well as more prayer and more people and a pipeline to make this happen. And by God's grace, we can do it. And so I believe there is another possible future for us. That the last chapter of the pandemic story for the Scottish Baptist churches will not be that decline accelerated and we watched over it, but that God gave increase and we joined in. That is the story I would like to tell my children and grandchildren, if I ever have any. I would like you to be able to do that as well. To say, in the 2020s, we were the generation who gave ourselves afresh, as so many others had done at different points in our history, to pursue increase in the face of the pressure of secularization and decline. Jesus tells a story about a man who goes out to sow seed. And some of the seed falls on hard ground. Some of it falls on the path. Some of it the birds come and peck away. Some of it falls among weeds, and the weeds grow up and choke it. Because it is difficult. He doesn't say it's easy sowing the seed of the gospel. But he says others, like seed sown on good soil, hear the word, accept it, and produce a crop. Some 30, some 60, some 100 times what was sown. And God is saying to us, if we plant, there is some seed that will be more productive and fruitful than we can even imagine. Because God is a God of abundance and not scarcity. And the word to us at this time is believe in God's abundance. Let's not tell a scarcity narrative that there's not enough God, that there's not enough gospel, that there's not enough grace, but rather, by God's abundance, it is possible for us to work together and see increase. There's a Greek poet called Dinos Christianopoulos, and I love what he said. It's a word for us as our secular society looks at the church and says, it looks like it's practically dead and buried. He wrote, they tried to bury us. They didn't know we were seeds.